Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Deploying Lync Mobility Services with Microsoft Lync Server 2013. In this video presentation, we're going to be taking a look at the mobility services of Lync Server 2013. We're going to start off the presentation with a mobility services overview. And as we go through the video, we're going to be introduced to the various services involved with the mobility services. Throughout the video, we're going to discuss the requirements for the mobility services. And we're also going to take a look at the mobility deployment process. What exactly is the mobility service? When you deploy the mobility feature with Lync Server 2013, it provides Lync functionality down to your mobile devices. Once we have deployed the mobility services at Covrock Fitness, we'll be able to provide Lync functionality down to our mobile clients. You can see on screen some of the supported platforms that Lync runs on top of: Apple iOS, Android, Windows Mobile, and also on Nokia. The mobile clients have the ability to send and receive instant messages. They can view contacts. They can also view presence information. The mobile clients also have the ability to use some of the enterprise voice features, such as call via work, single number reach. They can gain access to voicemail, and they can see that they have missed calls. They can also join into a conference through a single click. It's important to note that your mobile clients aren't all exactly the same. They don't all support the same exact features, and the interfaces don't all look exactly alike. For clients that are using the Apple iPad platform, they have access to enhanced capabilities. If these users join into a meeting using audio callback, the iPad user can view uploaded PowerPoint presentations within a meeting. They can also view the participant list in a meeting. One of the enterprise voice features supported by your mobile clients is called single number reach. With this feature, a user receives calls on their mobile phone even though the calls were dialed to their work number. Another very popular feature with our mobile clients is call via work. This feature allows a user to place an outbound call from your mobile phone, but it uses your work phone number instead. This allows the mobile client to maintain their work identity during a call from their mobile device. So the person that you're dialing, they don't see your mobile number. And we can also avoid the outbound calling charges. To use the call via work feature, a user can either dial directly from the mobile phone, or they can use the dial-out conferencing. If you use the dial-out conferencing, the mobility service makes the call on behalf of the user. So the server initiates the call and then calls the user back to complete the call. Microsoft Lync Server 2013 provides an auto-discover service that can be used by your mobile clients. It allows your clients the ability to be able to discover how to connect into the Lync environment, including gaining access to the web services, without having to manually provide a URL inside of your device settings. Although you can manually provide a URL, it's typically used for troubleshooting purposes. At Covrock Fitness, we want to make this as easy as possible on the end users. The mobility feature of Lync Server also supports push notifications down to your mobile devices. Push notifications are designed for devices that aren't supporting these applications running in the background. So your Microsoft Lync client-side software is inactive. So the push notifications are kind of like a wake-up call. It notifies your device about an event that's occurred while your application was inactive. For example, you may have just had a missed invitation for an instant messaging session. Let's take a look at the mobility services that provide us with support for our mobile clients. To provide support for your Lync client-side software running on your mobile devices, Microsoft provides 3 core services. We have the push notification service, the Lync Server 2013 mobility service, and the Lync Server 2013 auto discover service. Let's take a look at each of these. The Lync Server 2013 mobility service is the core service provided for the mobility feature. It supports the core functionality of mobility such as instant messaging and presence, contact support, and so forth. The mobility service is provided through an application which is installed as a virtual directory on your front-end servers. So when you open up your IIS administration console for your front-end servers, you'll see a new virtual directory labeled MCX, and that will be listed under both your internal and your external websites for your front-end servers. So once we deploy the mobility, we should expect to see an MCX virtual directory on both the internal and the external websites on all the front-end servers within our pool. When your Microsoft Lync clients power up and they go to register with the Lync server for the first time, the clients go through an auto-discovery process. And they do this by being hard-coded. They try to resolve the namespace of Lync Discover internal.zip domain. So in my case, we're using carverockfitness.com. The clients will try to resolve the FQDN of linkdiscoverinternal.carverockfitness.com. And if the clients are inside of the organization, we can have that namespace getting routed over to the front-end pool or directly over to a director pool if we're using the optional director. So we're trying to route the clients over to the Auto Discover service, and the Auto Discover service identifies the location of the user. So if you're able to connect over to the Lync Discover internal namespace, it knows that you're inside of the organization, and it can provide you with internal URLs to connect you over to the mobility service and also to the Lync web services. Now, if the internal namespace resolution fails, your client tries to use another name, linkdiscover.carverockfitness.com. So first we try Lync Discover internal, and if that fails, we go to Lync Discover. We chop off the internal component. And if that name resolution is successful out on the internet, we typically route that traffic coming in through a reverse proxy server. So we're trying to route the clients over to the Auto Discover service, and this service is automatically installed on every front-end server within your deployment. And if you're using the director pools, the optional role of the director, it's installed on the director as well. So when a client is able to auto-resolve Lync Discover internal, the internal namespace, we can route that traffic either over to a director pool or directly over to a front-end pool. For a client on the internet, we route the Lync Discover FQDN to our reverse proxy server. And the reverse proxy server can route that traffic either to a director pool or directly over to a front-end pool. The third service that we have required for mobility clients is called the Lync Server 2013 Push Notification Service, and this is a cloud-based service that's located in the Lync Online Data Center. If you have a Microsoft Lync mobile client that is inactive, the software is not running, the client doesn't know that some form of activity is happening. So your client doesn't have the ability to respond to different types of events, such as a new instant message invitation coming in, or a missed instant message, or possibly a missed call or voicemail. So in order to support your applications being in an inactive state, we have the ability to push notifications down to your client to let them know that some sort of an event has happened. And the user can touch the notification on your mobile device, and this activates the application. The way that the notifications get activated is by the mobility service. It sends the notification to the cloud-based push notification service out at Microsoft, which can then send the notification over to the Apple push notification service or to the Microsoft push notification service. And from there it gets sent down to your mobile device. The mobility services for Lync are supported with both the Lync Server 2013 Standard and Enterprise editions of the product. In our next slide, we see an example of the architecture of the mobility services going through the Lync Online Data Center. This slide comes from Microsoft TechNet and it's available to you online. You'll notice over to the left that I have the front-end servers running the mobility service, and the traffic going out onto the internet is going through the DMZ through our edge servers, and then routing out through the Lync Online Data Center. And the Lync Online Data Center then routes the notifications either through the Apple push notification service or through the Microsoft push notification service. And from there the notifications get passed down to your clients. Let's take a look at our mobility requirements. In order to support the mobile clients, we have certain infrastructure requirements that have to be met in regards to our internal and external DNS, our firewalls, certificates, IIS, and we also have to consider our reverse proxy servers and load balancing. Let's take a look at each of these. With the deployment of the mobility services, we have to make sure that we update our internal and our external DNS servers to be able to support auto discovery. On the internal DNS server, we provide a host record for linkdiscoverinternal.carverockfitness.com. And we make sure that that name routes over to the front-end pool or to a director pool if we were using one. For the clients on the internet, they're not able to resolve Lync Discover internal, but they will be able to resolve the linkdiscover.carverockfitness.com namespace. We have to make sure that that name maps down to an IP address that routes over to our reverse proxy server. And the web publishing rule on the reverse proxy server can then route that traffic over to our front-end pool or to a director pool if you were using one. Another requirement that we have pertains to your firewalls and your Apple mobile devices. In order for these devices to receive push notifications over your Wi-Fi network, you have to open up port 5223 on the Wi-Fi. This is an outbound TCP port used by the Apple push notification service, and your mobile devices initiate the connection. When we look at the Microsoft Lync Server certificate requirements, we have to take into consideration the auto-discover namespace that we're using. So whether your clients are trying to auto-discover with Lync Discover Internal or Lync Discover, those namespaces would have to be supported on your front-end servers and also on your director pools. With your reverse proxy server out in your DMZ, it is recommended to also support this namespace on a valid certificate to support secure connections coming in from the internet. You can have a connection coming in over port 80 that gets bridged over to port 443 internally. But keep in mind, it's not the recommended approach. Microsoft's recommendation for IIS is that you use IIS 7.5 for mobility. When you install the mobility service, it is going to configure some of the ASP.NET flags to improve performance inside of IIS. Keep in mind that IIS 7.5 is installed by default with Windows Server 2008 R2. At Covrock Fitness, we're going to be using a front-end pool with 3 servers in it. So when web traffic is coming into our front-end pool, we have to use hardware-based load balancing to route the traffic to the servers behind that virtual IP address. The web service traffic has to be configured for source affinity on the hardware-based load balancing appliance. And this guarantees me that multiple connections from a single client are sent to the same server. With the mobility services, we also have to take into consideration our reverse proxy server configuration out in our DMZ. We have to make sure that the web services URL and also the namespace that we're using for auto discovery externally, linkdiscover.covrockfitness.com, both have the ability to route over to the reverse proxy server. And from there, the reverse proxy server will route the traffic directly over to our front-end pool. We're not using a director pool. On this next slide, we see an example of an architectural overview of the mobility services and how the auto-discover works. This slide comes from the Microsoft TechNet website, and it's readily available on the internet. As you look at the diagram, over to the left we have our internet, the public network. And over to the right we have our internal private network. On our internal network we have our Lync Server 2013 front-end pool. At Covrock Fitness we have 3 servers within our pool. And each of the servers in the pool are running IIS. And you'll notice that each of them have their own separate website for external connectivity and for internal connectivity for Microsoft Lync. The external website supports traffic over port 4443. The internal website supports port 443. Well, if I take a look at the diagram over here to the left, I have an example of a client that's out on the internet. And the client auto-discovers the namespace of linkdiscover.covrockfitness.com. And once the client has that namespace resolved down to an IP address through the external DNS, that traffic should route us in through a reverse proxy server. And the reverse proxy server connects us over to that auto-discover virtual directory on IIS on the external website. The auto-discover service will provide information to my client on how to connect to the mobility services. And once again, that traffic comes through the reverse proxy also. Now, for a client inside of the organization, my internal client will try to auto-discover the namespace of linkdiscoverinternal.covrockfitness.com. And that namespace is going to route us over directly to our front-end pool because we're not using a director pool. But you'll notice that my mobility URL for the clients inside of the organization are routing back out to the external website URL for mobility. Let's take a look at the mobility deployment process. While deploying the mobility services, there are several steps that you have to take to make sure that your mobile clients are able to work properly. Let's take a look. First of all, we have to take care of our DNS records used for auto-discovery. For clients inside of the organization, they're going to look for an internal record called linkdiscoverinternal.covrockfitness.com. And on the external DNS server, we have to provide a host record that resolves linkdiscover.covrockfitness.com. The internal resolution gets us right over to our front-end pool, but the external resolution brings us in through the reverse proxy server. For the auto-discovery process, we also have to make sure that we incorporate the namespaces we're using for auto-discovery onto our certificates, on the front-end servers, on the director servers, and also possibly on our reverse proxy server if we're using secure connections coming in. The reverse proxy server also has to be configured with web publishing rules to route the traffic coming in from the internet over to our front-end pool. We have our auto-discover traffic, our mobility traffic, and also our web services traffic. At Covrock Fitness, we're using a hardware load balancing appliance because we have 3 servers in that front-end pool. So the traffic coming from the reverse proxy will point over or route over to the hardware load balancing appliance virtual IP address. We also have to configure push notifications at Covrock Fitness. We're using a Microsoft Lync Server 2013 Edge server. So we need to add a hosting provider in our environment, which is Microsoft Lync Online. And then we have to set up a hosting provider federation relationship between Carve Rock Fitness and Microsoft Lync Online. And then finally, you have to enable push notifications, and this is done through command line also, using the set-cs push notifications configuration commandlet. Our next step in the mobility deployment process is configuring the mobility policy, and we can handle this either coming in through the control panel or by using the Lync server management shell. Our final step in the mobility process deployment would be testing it out to make sure that it works properly. And Microsoft has a test commandlet for that also, test-cs federated partner. Let's take a look at a demonstration on the mobility deployment process. In this demonstration, we're going to see how to set up the mobility services for Microsoft Lync Server 2013. And to start the demonstration, I've just switched over to my DNS server. And on the DNS server on my internal network, I need to provide an internal resolution for auto discovery. So here we're going to go down to our DNS administrative tool. We'll open up our forward lookup zones, go to carverockfitness.com, right click, and then we're going to create a new A record. Now, when you're creating a record, if you have a hardware-based load balancing environment where you already have a namespace that's being used to route web-based traffic over to the HLB VIP, you can use a canonical name or a CNAME, an alias record, and point over to the other namespace that will route the web traffic over to your pool. Now, in my case, it doesn't matter. I'm going to provide my Lync Discover internal resolution. Here I'll type in Lync Discover, internal, and then I'll map that down to an IP address, 10.0.0.12. So in this case over here, I want to make sure that my Lync Discover internal namespace routes over to the virtual IP address of the hardware-based load balancing appliance. If you have a single server in your pool, you can route the traffic directly over to the single server's IP address. Here, I'm going to click on Add Host. Here it was successfully created. We'll click on OK, and then we'll click on Done. Let's switch over to our Microsoft Lync server and take a look at some of the other responsibilities that we have to set up our mobility. We have just switched over to the Microsoft Lync server front-end environment, and we're going to complete the process of setting up mobility. Now keep in mind that as part of the process, you would want to make sure that you had the appropriate namespaces on the certificates on your reverse proxy server, your directors, and also on your front-end servers. Now this is something that I would have taken care of originally when I requested my certificates. But if you need to make modifications to your certificates or to administer them, you have several commandlets that you can use for this. Microsoft has a get-cs certificate, a request-cs certificate, and also a set-cs certificate commandlet. You may find these commandlets useful if you need to update your subject alternative names on your certificates. You also want to be aware that if you're hosting a hybrid environment, where some of your clients are on-premise and some of your clients are off-premise, being hosted out at Microsoft, you would have to define your auto-discovery for a hybrid environment by using the set-cs hosting provider commandlet. So the next step in our deployment, we're going to configure a mobility policy, and this is done coming in through the command line interface. So here we're going to go to All Programs, Microsoft Lync Server 2013, and we're going to open up our Lync Server Management Shell. Now that my Lync Server Management Shell is opened up successfully, let's take a look at our existing mobility policy. Here we're going to type in get-cs mobility policy. And then when we hit enter, you can see that I currently only have a global policy configured. The identity is set to global, enable outside voice is enabled, enabling mobility is enabled, enable IP audio video is enabled, require Wi-Fi for IP audio and for IP video is also disabled. If I want to modify the existing policy, I can use the set-cs mobility policy commandlet. If you want to enable policies at the site level or down to the tag or what we call user level, we can do that also. So here's an example. So in this example here, we're going to type new-cs mobility policy, put in the identity, and this is going to be a site policy, so we're going to create a site policy for Scottsdale. And then we'll configure some of the options. So here I have enable IP audio video, we'll set that to false. Then we'll use the require Wi-Fi for IP audio. We'll set that to true. And I have require Wi-Fi for IP video, and we'll set that to true also. And then hit enter. And you can see that I've now created a mobility policy for my site called Scottsdale. Let's take a look at some other examples. In my next example, I'm going to configure push notifications with Lync Server 2013. And I have to do this coming in through the command line. So let's start this off by clearing the screen. If you want to add a Lync Server online hosting provider to your Microsoft Lync topology, you would use the new-cs hosting provider commandlet. Now, for the sake of my demonstration, I'm going to use the get commandlet, get-cs hosting provider. And when I hit enter, you can see that I currently have Lync Online. The identity is Lync Online. I have my proxy fully qualified domain name, so my traffic is going through sipfed.online.lync.com. My verification level is set to use source verification, and it's not enabled right now. So what I need to do is I need to use the set-cs hosting provider and specify that it's enabled by using $true. Let's take a look. So here I have set-cs hosting provider. And the identity that I'm going to use for this one here is Lync Online. And we'll use enabled, $true. And you can see here that that has completed successfully. You can see now that it's enabled. Now my next step would be to set up a hosting provider federation between my organization, Carve Rock Fitness, and the push notification service out at Lync Online. And the command line for this one is new-cs allowed domain. Here's an example. And the identity of mine is push.lync.com. And once again here, we see that that ran successfully for us. The next thing I would do is set up push notifications. So if I want to enable push notifications, I have to allow these with Microsoft and also with the Apple environment. So let's take a look at a commandlet, set-cs push notification configuration. Here we have enable Apple push notification service. We're going to set that to $true. And I also have the enable option for Microsoft. Here I have enable Microsoft push notification service, and we're going to set that to $true also. Then we'll hit enter, and we just enabled push notifications. Once I get to this point, I would test out my federation and make sure that it's working properly. Microsoft has some commandlets that you can use for testing your federation and also for testing notifications. So for example, you have a test-cs federated partner commandlet, and you can also test push notifications with the test-cs mcx push notification commandlet. Let's close out of the command line interface. Before we close out of the demonstration, let's take a quick look at our control panel. And we're going to log in as administrator. And from inside of the control panel, we're going to navigate down to our federation and external access. And you'll notice that I have my SIP federated providers, and here I have my SIP federated domains. You can see that I have push.lync.com set up as an allowed domain. I also have my SIP federated partners, or providers, and you can see here that I have hosted provider Lync Online. Let's close out of the control panel. Well, that's the end of the demonstration on setting up the mobility services, and I hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you in the next video.